All right. Hi, Kamal. Hi, Calev. Thank you so much for
Hello.
joining me here today on Vonvo.com. Today's date is April 21st, 2013. Just before we get started, I wanted to go over two quick ground rules. The first is that right now this conversation is being recorded, and after the recording is completed, we'll be uploading this video to the internet to our YouTube channel. Is that okay with both of you?
Yes.
Okay, great. And then on top of that, here at Vonvo, we are all about our conversation staying both civil and valuable. We don't want there to be any personal attacks against one another or anyone else who were to join the chat room during the discussion. Is that okay with both of you?
Yes, it is.
All right, great. So let's get our conversation started. Just for anyone who's in the audience right now, would you each mind giving a quick background of yourself and why you're so passionate about this topic? And then we'll start, speaking on the said subject. So Kamal, you can go first, and
So
then
let
Caleb.
you guys go first. I've been here many times. Let you guys go
All
first.
right,
It's very
Caleb,
soon.
go ahead, Caleb.
I mean, the reason that I'm passionate about finding a peaceful solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is because I live in Jerusalem. I'm an Israeli. I'm also a civil rights and human rights advocate, and so I really care about the rights and welfare of people on both sides of the Green Line, like we say. This is an area that I invest a lot of time writing and speaking and advocating about, and so yeah, it's an issue that's dear to my heart.
Great, great. And Kamal, if you just want to give a quick background of yourself and why you're so passionate.
Well, obviously, I'm passionate because I am from Jerusalem, and unlike us, I can no longer live there anymore. Once we've immigrated to the United States, so even if I wanted to go back and live there for a year or two, I can't. That's one. Moreover, I visit there every year, and I see how the people live, in particular how the Palestinians live. Now, usually I have it a little bit better than them because I have a U.S. passport, which allows me to travel between the West Bank and Israel, not easily, but the fact is I can travel, and I can see how the rest of them, how their lives are, how they don't have free movement of labor, how they're unable to work, how their lives are really difficult. And, and that has always inspired me to do everything I can. And moreover, finally, I just see enormous potential between both people that if they were to reach a common ground and understanding a solution, that nothing except good can come out of this. And so I'm very optimistic about the future, and that's what motivates me.
Great. So, then let's get our conversation started. So, Caleb, would you mind just giving your overall take, on the conflict as a whole, and then, from there we'll sort of transition into, solutions to it and some of the ones that we're going to address today?
I mean, regarding the conflict, my opinion is that much of the dialogue that is still happening today revolves around historical facts. What actually happened in 1948? Was it, an intentional ethnic cleansing of the first Zionists that came to Israel? Or, were we attacked by Arab states after the UN declaration, and hence many Palestinians left because of their own initiative or encouraged by the states around Israel to do so? Um, there are many. I'm getting some background noise here.
Yeah, I was going to say, the individual, Mustafa, if you could click exit Vonvo, or Caleb, if you just mute Mustafa's camera, if you put your mouse over his screen, he must have some background noise coming in. Mustafa, if you could click exit Vonvo and simply just watch, that would be great. But go ahead, Caleb. Did that help?
So yeah, so a lot of this it helped me a lot. Yeah. So a lot of discussion is regarding who was actually responsible for what happened in 1948. And I
Something is
prefer not to
wrong.
go into the.
Yeah, Kamal, just mute Mustafa's camera. If you put your mouse over his camera, you can
Got it. Got it.
go ahead.
Yeah, so I think it's I'm neither an expert in history, and I don't think it's very beneficial when we start going into the historical narratives and who's actually responsible for what, etc. I'm more just looking for a pragmatic solution for what's happening today, and I believe that the way to move forward pragmatically is to really discuss, expose, and challenge the human rights abuses. So you put people in the center of the dialogue. I think that people's rights to dignity, to individual freedoms, to democracy, to rule of law are more important than historical claims to land. I've been investing the last 10 years of my life challenging the Israeli government on abuses of civil and human rights. We've handled over 520 cases in the Jerusalem Institute of Justice, including 20 petitions before the Supreme Court. But because Israel has a democratic standard that it declared in its Declaration of Independence that it intended to uphold, I have the tools as a civil rights advocate to challenge my own government. And I've found that there's nobody more critical of the Israeli government than Israelis else. And I'm in that category. But many times when I'm speaking with and discussing these issues with my Palestinian counterparts, it's very hard to find voices that are trying to advance human rights on the Palestinian side and criticizing the Palestinian Authority and the Hamas on issues of abuses of human rights. And I think that both sides need to take responsibility for their issues. Until we have two regimes that uphold rule of law, human rights, democracy, and personal freedoms, we really don't even have grounds for a discussion. And so that's my opinion on the issue. I'd love to hear what Kamal thinks about those issues as well.
Yeah, and just quickly before Kamal, you say anything, just for anyone who's inside the chat room, if you could just not click the start speaking button, as it might result in a bug of 5 speakers coming into the room, and then if Mustafa, you can click exit Vonvo if you hear us, that'd be great, and just simply watch. But now go ahead, Kamal.
Well, I agree with several of the things that your guest said. In particular, that most people talk about history. I'll get to the human rights aspect of it at the end of my talk. But first, I'd like to really thank your guest for the fine work that he is doing on the Israeli side. I certainly think we do need a lot more people like him, and he certainly needs partners on our side because I found that having partners, we can actually pull this off together much easier than if any one of us is working by himself. But then again, at the end of the day, you need solutions. And in order to deal with solutions, you want to understand what people's fears are, what people's concerns are, and what people's aspirations are. And I put it, down. I summarized it down to basic numbers. Israel, obviously, when it was created with the intention of being a Jewish state. There's always been difficulty with this. The difficulty stems from the fact that the land it rules is not 100% Jewish. And so they want it to be a Jewish state, a democratic state, but yet rule over a population that's not all Jewish. And that the very nature of that causes problems. Most of this problem was solved when Israel became a state after most Palestinians either left their homes or were kicked out. As many of you know, this problem came back in an ugly way back in 20 years later when Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza. All of a sudden the percentage of non-Jews became much higher. So now we have a situation where you have about 6 million Jews in Israel and the West Bank, and you have probably around 5 million Palestinians in the same territory. And so, and reaching a solution, you have to keep that in mind. Because as I understand the Israeli side, and I know my side, but as I understand the Israeli side, not only do they want a Jewish state, they also want a secure state. And so, and at the same time, and so if we were to sit there and talk about the current issue that they're talking about now, which is separation, creating two distinct countries, the problem with that, and the reason they haven't been able to solve it, and I think it's the right thing that they haven't been able to solve it based on the two states, because both people have strong claims to the other side. Like what I learned to my trips to Israel is many Jews, in particular more Orthodox Jews, to them the West Bank is more important than Israel proper. They say, this is the heart of it. This is where Judah was. And so they have strong claims to that land. And for Palestinians, Palestine is not just the West Bank and Gaza. It includes all of Israel. Well, that being the case, the answer cannot possibly come from separation. It has to come from a shared future for us to learn to live together in a way where we can function as one entity, but yet Jews can have a Jewish state and they can be secure. Palestinians can have their equality, can have their own state, but yet function as one country. So over the last 5 years, as I've been going to Israel and on Facebook, in our Facebook pages, we've been trying different solutions. Right. And one of the solutions that has been put forward is the idea of a federation of two states but one country, and to figure out the details in a way where both sides can have most of what they want. So, the closest thing they came up with, again, a federation or a confederation where you have two sovereign states. So Jews can have their Jewish state, Palestinians can have their Palestinian state, but together form one united country with a federal parliament. So my point is here, without going into the details of what we're offering, the solution that we're offering, in order to reach a solution, I think you need to address what people want, what their fears are, and how you can look at both sides, which may want different things, and create a solution that gives them most of what you want. In terms of the human rights issue that your guest mentioned, it's great. It is true that, in Israelis, we do have some Israelis, who do what your guest does, and this is a great thing. Yes, this is not as common among Palestinian society. Among Palestinian society, there's a different type of thinking. And one of the thinking, especially in the West Bank, a part of the psychology, is that the government we have, for example, the PA, the government we have is not really an independent government. They don't really control anything. So they still see themselves as really being under Israel. And they see basically Abu Mazen as his group is really nothing more than a mayor, like a mayor of a town. Right. So they still see the final authority as being with Israel. That shouldn't stop them. You're absolutely right. There should be more demand. But, I remind your guests, in the West Bank, there is substantial freedom. They make comedies where they insult the government, they make fun of the government. The way the West Bank is portrayed in Israel is not completely accurate. There's substantial freedom of speech. Every once in a while they may arrest a journalist. That's true, but it hasn't stopped the atmosphere of freedom or freedom of speech. I mean, they have a TV show. Right. That was recently shut off after a year. Right. Where the main purpose of the TV show is just to make fun of the government. Now, Gaza is probably a little bit different, but, I can't speak with more details on Gaza, right. But, because I'm not there. But go ahead. I spoke too much now.
Go ahead, Calev.
I think what Kamal is saying, that we do need to take both the desires and the fears of both parties into account if we're going to be talking about a solution. This issue of a federation, maybe a good idea, and it may be a feasible idea one day. I've often thought that the Swiss federation model has worked pretty well for them, which is taking areas of ethnic homogeneity and language, and building what's called in Switzerland cantons, and then having a federal government above that. But if you really look at the facts on the ground today, there isn't even a basis for 2 states. There's actually a basis for 3 states. The Hamas in Gaza and Fatah in the West Bank have extreme animosity between themselves, and also violence. Abu Mazen, who claims to be the head of the Palestinian Authority, cannot even enter into Gaza, where half of the Palestinians live, for fear of his life, and Haniya can't enter into the West Bank either. Neither of them recognizes the authority of each one, and both of them claims to be the true leadership of the Palestinian Authority, and that doesn't look like a problem that's going to disappear quickly. So if we're even more at a federation, you would probably be talking about 3 homogeneous states instead of 2. Add to that the fact that one of those players, which is the Hamas, which has between 1.5 to 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, has declared intentions in their formation charter to destroy the nation of Israel. And so talking about making some kind of nation with that government today, it really looks like a impossible proposal, to say the least. Kamal also talked about the relative freedom of speech even in the West Bank, and I'd like to differ on that issue. I mean, just weeks ago, a young man named Anas Awad received a prison sentence in Nablus, which is only 30 or 40 kilometers from where I'm sitting right here in Jerusalem, of 1.5 years in prison for putting a joke about Mahmoud Abbas's Facebook page. And he's the second young man to be sentenced to a prison term for putting a satirical joke on his Facebook page. So I don't know what freedom of expression Kamal is discussing, but I would beg to differ. In fact, what we see on the grounds in the West Bank today, in the Palestinian Authority, over the last year alone, we've had over 1,500 arbitrary arrests, degrading treatment. We've seen executions without trial, abuses of women's rights and children's rights and freedom of speech. These issues need to be addressed. And I believe that the entity that's the most capable of addressing these issues and putting pressure on both the Palestinian Authority and the Hamas to the extent possible to advance human rights reform is the international community, and particularly the United States and Europe, which are funding these entities in numbers of billions of dollars per year. According to research that we did recently, from the signing of the Oslo Accords in 1994 until today, the Palestinians and the Palestinian Authority has received more than 25 times the amount of aid given from the United States to Europe under the Marshall, the reconstruction of the European economy after World War II. We're talking between 30 and 40 billion dollars. So with the money given to the Palestinian Authority, we could have reconstructed the European economy over 25 times. The big question is, what's all the money? What has been done with all this aid? Why is the average Palestinian still living in abject poverty? And the answer to that question, forgive me for answering my own question, but we've done a lot of research on this issue, is that the Palestinian leadership is very corrupt, and a lot of this money is flowing into private bank accounts. It's not a secret that Mahmoud Abbas receives a monthly salary of over $1 million per month, which is 30 times the salary of President Barack Obama and 90 times the salary of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. According to Arabic bloggers, his personal net worth is around $100 million, while the average Palestinian on the street is just suffering in poverty. Why is this not being monitored? Why is the international community dumping all this aid into a regime that is not advancing the rights of the people that it claims to represent? That is a key issue that must be addressed if we're going to advance toward peace. If that can be addressed, if we can have an entity on the other side of the green line that respects human rights, rule of law, individual freedoms, and democracy, then we can come up with a one-state solution, a two-state solution, a three-state solution. All these things could work. But right now, it's a dire situation, and I believe the national community needs to start getting engaged in this dialogue.
your guest is describing, he's looking at the effect of a chaotic situation. I mean, and that's what you really have. I mean, he talked about initially that there's potentially a three-state solution. You have Gaza, you have the West Bank, but you have to keep in mind that the reason there would be a three-state solution is because there's a fundamental disagreement between Palestinians and what the outcome is, as there is in Israel. I mean, I can make the same argument for Israelis that there would need to be a fourth state solution because you have a substantial number of Israelis who refuse to live in Israel, who want to go live in the West Bank. They don't believe in the idea of separating into a two-state solution. My point is, the chaotic situation that you're describing now, I think, stems from what's being offered or not offered on the table. I mean, I think the problem is with the two-state solution. You're telling people that, we want, hey, you're going to take this one small state and this is going to be your country and give up all your rights to what you believe you have rights in. And this offer has basically divided the Palestinian population. I mean, ultimately, those who rule Gaza, it's not really about religion, because they have a coalition of secular people too. Those who rule Gaza, it's basically based on resistance to the idea of the two-state solution, because they believe they have legitimate rights throughout Israel. Whether you agree with that or not is not relevant, because I just want you to understand, this split didn't come out of thin air. They have legitimate political disputes, and this is what we try to address. We say, well, rather than just, propose these nice-sounding solutions, let's look at what both Israelis and Palestinians want. And similar, I mean, if we were to talk about a two-state solution for Israelis, it's not satisfactory for Israelis. You have now, 800,000 Israelis, Jews living in the West Bank, and who believe they have a right, not just because they're there, they believe they have a biblical right to be there. You can't ask these people to leave. You just can't ask these people to leave. So you want to look, why do you think that you have a right to be there? And they believe they have a right to be there because they believe that's a legitimate inherent birthright. So, Israel has the same conflicts that many of the Palestinians have. You mentioned corruption. Corruption is a serious problem. It's nowhere. I hear music.
Yeah, I would mute Mustafa's camera again. He's got too much background noise in his thing that I can't even ask him a question if he had a question for both of you, but go ahead.
Okay. Yes, corruption is a problem, but I think, and I don't think he intentionally do it, but I think your guest seriously exaggerates the idea with corruption. But the problem with corruption is not within the Palestinians alone. Corruption is a problem throughout the region, including Israel. I mean, you've had prime ministers and ministers that have had to resign in Israel over claims of corruption. You have Olmert, you have recently the foreign minister. So, corruption is a problem. And when you talk about, in terms of the corruption among the Palestinians, they do not get billions of dollars a year. They simply do not. I mean, they are the biggest recipient of aid from the United States. The aid from the United States, most of it, the overwhelming majority of it, goes towards project. The actual cash they get is minimal. It's a small percentage of the actual aid. Now, the corruption that most people talk about, they're talking about the corruption that occurred 10 years ago that still sticks with the PA. That just doesn't exist anymore. I mean, no one says it exists today the same way it exists 10 years ago when they first tried to become an entity. And among the reasons, even if they didn't make reforms, they cannot be that corrupt because they don't really have the cash, because most countries, including the United States, Saudi Arabia, and anyone else who gives them money, only pays for specific projects. And as a case in point, And the reason and the reason they live in a bad situation, according to the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, no matter how much money the Palestinians receive, it would still not lift them out of poverty, because they have a situation where they don't have free movement of labor and goods. When you don't have free movement of labor and goods, you cannot have a functioning economy in the West Bank alone. And same thing with Gaza. You don't have a functioning economy with Gaza alone. You not. I mean, these are not my analysis. That's what the World Bank says. That's what the International Monetary Fund says. Add to the fact that even if you had unlimited amount of money, you still would have people in poverty, because the West Bank is isolated with no potential for any industry rising there because of the closures. Add to that the primary source of money for the Palestinians, first of all, comes from tax collections that Israel collects, around 100 or 150 million a month. Every once in a while, every time Israel gets angry with the PA, they cut off that money, as they did most recently. And similar with the U.S., every time the U.S. gets angry with the PA, they cut off that money. So the PA has not received money from the United States since November of last year. It is only after President Barack Obama came to visit Israel that they said, okay, that we're going to start releasing this money. And the money was released mostly into USAID for projects. So these people have not had money. They have not had cash money since November. Saudi Arabia had to step in a couple of times and give them an infusion, each of $100 million, which is nowhere near enough to even pay the salaries of the PA. So I think you're focusing, but the reason I talk about these details, which I don't think we should talk about them, but you're focusing on a situation that's not within the control of the Palestinians. Certainly there should be more human rights there. I think you guys should certainly be working with lawyers. You know, I'm a lawyer and I'm a civil rights lawyer, or I started my career as a civil rights lawyer. And certainly I would love a partner on the Israel side where we can work together for the civil rights of both Israelis and Palestinians in all the land between Jordan and the Mediterranean, and including the civil rights of Jews in the West Bank, and hopefully one day Jews in the Gaza, and certainly Palestinians inside Israel,
Right.
what you refer to as Arab Israelis, all people, without any doubt. That should be a constant challenge, even if we were to find a solution, even if we were to find a political solution. The fight for civil rights should always continue. There can never be, just a 1 month thing. And you can't tell people who have no control over their lives, and they don't. Palestinians do not have control over their lives. You cannot tell them, once you figure yourself out, then we can talk freedom with you, then we can talk freedom of goods, then we can talk trade, then we can lift the sanctions against you. I mean, really, you can say that all you want, but I assure you, you will never reach a solution with that approach.
So Calev, go ahead and respond to what Kamal just said, but maybe on his last point, how we can transition into solutions. What then, would need to happen next, and we could start to talk about some solutions and maybe some of the problems Kamal addresses.
Kamal raised some valued issues. He talked about, for instance, corruption in the Israeli society, and I, as an Israeli, on one hand, am sad that that's true, that there has been corruption in our government, but on the other hand, I'm proud with the Israeli system. If you take Moshe Katsav, for instance, which is our president, who's sitting in prison right now, he received a criminal verdict on several accounts of criminal activity. It's interesting to point out, by the way, that verdict came down in 2010 by an Arab Israeli judge named George Kara. So you have a situation where an Arab Israeli judge sentences a Jewish Israeli president to over 7 years in prison. And you'd think in most Middle Eastern countries, in a situation like that, he'd probably lose his job, right? But within 10 months of passing that decision, George Kara was actually promoted to be our second Israeli Arab justice on our Supreme Court, which just goes to show that the Palestinian refugees that Israel received in 1948, 150,000 Palestinian refugees that are now 1.5 million of our citizens within the Israeli society, do have equal rights, and they do have opportunity to advance within our society. They serve in our Knesset, they serve ministers in our government, and also as members of our Supreme Court. So I'm proud. I'm sad that corruption does exist in our society, but I'm very proud that as a civil rights, human rights activist, I have the tools to challenge these abuses in our society and advance freedom. The same tools that I have in my toolbox as a civil rights advocate, unfortunately, still do not exist within the Palestinian Authority. I have Palestinian friends that told me that, when the military administration was stronger before the Oslo Accords, there was more freedom of expression in the West Bank than there is today under Mahmoud Abbas's administration, where again you have people being put in jail for putting jokes on their Facebook page. This is a sad, sad reality. I'm not advancing a two-state solution either. I think the last thing that the Middle East needs today is another fundamental radical Islamic regime in Israel or anywhere else. It appears to me that our friend Kamal is a moderate Muslim, and I applaud him for that. And I hope that we could build a cooperation, become friends, and advance freedom in our area. But if you were to recognize today the Palestinian Authority as an independent state, it would be absolutely disastrous. Because it would hurt the Palestinians.
What alternative are you offering?
The alternative that I'm offering is this. We all need to get engaged in creating a system that upholds human rights, challenging both the Palestinian Authority and Israel on human rights abuses. And once you have regimes on both sides of the border that uphold democracy, human rights, individual freedoms, and rule of law, then you're able to come up with a solution. It could be one state. It could be two or three states. It could be a federation. But right now, I don't see a basis existing of a proper civil society on the Palestinian side. Now, regarding what's happening in the West Bank from an Israeli point of view, I'd like to say, I think we need to start with the 70,000 Palestinians that live in Area C that don't have a government that's taken responsibility for them. So what happened after the Oslo Accords is you have areas A and B, which are under the Palestinian Authority, and then Area C, which has 350,000 Jews, that have Israeli citizenship and Israeli passport, pay taxes in Israel, etc., and about 70,000 Palestinians that are in no man's land. Nobody's really taking responsibility for them. They don't have a Palestinian passport. They don't have an Israeli passport. I believe that the Israeli government should offer citizenship to these people. I don't think it would be a demographic crisis for us. They're only like 0.8% of our population. I think it's not right that they don't have any government that takes responsibility for them, gives them a passport, gives them traveling rights, etc. I think that until a solution can be found, those people should be granted Israeli citizenship, those of them who want it. So at least you don't have a situation where if people where no government is offering to take responsibility for them. I'd like to just address the issue before we go deeper into solutions regarding freedom of travel. I want to say as an Israeli that I think that the security fence is a terrible thing. It's a monstrosity, and I wish it didn't exist. But the unfortunate fact of the matter is that between the years 2000 and 2003, when the construction of that fence began, over 950 Israelis were killed by Palestinian terrorism. If you jump to 2009, after the 6-year period when the fence completed construction, those numbers dropped by 99.9%. So even though I don't like the fence, even though it's a monstrosity, even though I wish it didn't exist, without the fence we die. With the fence we live. So it's an unfortunate necessity at the moment. Now, thousands of Palestinians go across our checkpoints every day to work in Israel and then return home. They have the inconvenience of waiting online to go through the checkpoint. But I would still say, and I think most people who appreciate human rights like I do would agree with me, that the inconvenience of waiting on a line to get through a checkpoint is a lesser evil than death by terrorism of innocent Israelis. And so it's an unfortunate, inconvenient necessity that we have to live with today. Hopefully a day will come when that'll come down. Hopefully a day will come where we do have two societies that respect human rights, that control the security on the ground, that we won't need that fence. I hope it comes down like it came down between East and West Berlin. And may that day come soon. But right now, because of the facts on the ground, it needs to exist.
Your guest starts by talking about the situation of Palestinians inside Israel that you refer to as Arab Israelis, and he talks about the Supreme Court justice. But I think your guest proves my point with that. The reason you have Arab Israelis and that I call Palestinian Israelis, the reason they are proud citizens of Israel, the reasons they don't do suicide bombings, the reason they don't commit violence is because they were offered equality, something that was deprived the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. I mean, I like to remind your guests that, when Israel ruled these places, when ruled the West Bank and Gaza from 1967 to the late 80s, they were considered by Israel as sleepy towns. There was nothing happening there. There was no violence, nothing. But yet those people were put in a ridiculous predicament. They were not citizens of the country that ruled them. They had no civil rights in Israel whatsoever. If they wanted to travel like we did, you had the option, since you don't have a passport, you can either get something called laissez-passer. I don't know why they use a French term for it, which means travel document. And you can travel through Ben Gurion Airport. But if you were using a laissez-passer, that means you had to come back every year, or you lose your right to come back forever. Your option B was to go through Jordan. You get a Jordanian passport. Why on earth would a Palestinian under Israel's control go beg the Jordanians to give me a passport? And if the Jordanians gave you a passport, then you can leave for a period of 3 years. And if you don't come back for 3 years, you lose your right to come back forever. So this is our situation. So my point is, the whole example you did with Arab Israelis is exactly my point. The reason you have a different experience with Palestinian Israelis is you gave them a solution, just like you're offering at least the people in Area C now. And I commend you for at least recognizing the despicable situation that the people in Area C are in. I mean, they have trash that's mountains high in their streets, because there's no one to pick it up. There's no civil authority. The Palestinians are not allowed to go there. If they became victims of crime, if someone was to rob their house, they have no police that they can call, so the community has to basically defend itself. So yes, I would offer them citizenship too, but and I'm sure though, in addition to citizenship, I'm assuming that your guest was saying that with giving them citizenship, you want all of Area C as part of Israel. And I know that's being offered by one of the head of the political parties now who did strong in the last elections. I don't remember his name. But if you did that, so basically what you end up doing is taking the land without the people, and you need a more comprehensive solution for the entire region. So if you're thinking of offering citizenship, I would offer it to everyone and do it in a way that doesn't threaten Israel. And so in terms of human rights and free speech, again, going back to that issue, you said that some of them, in the West Bank, they get arrested for insulting Abbas. That may be correct, and that is despicable. That is despicable. No one can disagree with that. But we can work on that together as part of a solution. You can offer and say, hey, we want a solution. Let's use federation or confederation as an example and say we want that. But as a condition of this, here's the outcome that we're going to agree on. A through Z. as part of this, you need to get rid of this, you need to do this, and that's fine. That would be unacceptable. But just to say blankly, well, first you need to have paradise on earth in the West Bank and Gaza, even though it's a total nightmare. And then once you have paradise on earth, then we'll think of talking to you about a solution. You're really only fooling yourself, and you're basically putting the problem in the pressure cooker. And what will happen is every 6 to 7 years it explodes because people cannot tolerate it anymore. The other point you mentioned is that Israel does allow thousands of people every year to come in, and that is true. All that proves is Israel does have the ability to allow some freedom of movement with security, and it works just fine. Well, if that is the case, why don't we offer freedom of movement and labor for all of Palestinians, at least in the West Bank, and put them through the same security checks? If we know that the current security checks work, we can expand the security checks to make it where we could even make a deal with the PA. We can tell the PA, look, on your side, you do the frisking or check the cars, and we do secondary checks on the Israeli side, but and we'll add more men to do this, so we can have the process be a quick process, and this way we can be an open country where there's free commerce. So it can be done. I mean, Israel proves today with the small number of Palestinians that allows in that it can have free movement of labor if Israel wants to, and they can do it in a secure way. Another point you mentioned was that you said the security fence. That one of the biggest misconceptions, and I don't think your guest does this intentionally. I think many people genuinely misunderstand this. They think that the closures after the suicide bombing. That's simply not true. The fence went up after the security bombing, but the fence went up in areas that were closed 10 years before that. If you remember, during the first uprising, when the Palestinians were uprising, the fact that they didn't have any kind of equality, that they lived under military rule, Israel decided to punish them in several ways. Initially, they closed their colleges, then they closed their schools, and they took several punitive measures. And when the Palestinians, and then one of the final measures they took to show them that if you don't stop the uprising, well, we're gonna stop your ability to move back into Israel. So what they did, beginning in 1990, long before the second Intifada, long before the suicide bombing, they put barricades in the same place that the walls exist now. The only difference is they monitored with Israeli soldiers, and Palestinians had the ability to avoid these barricades, not through their car, and not through goods, but they could jump somewhere, like walk in the valleys. But the closures happened 10 years before that. You're right. The fence was helpful, but in terms of stopping suicide bombing. But I think the Palestinians simply decided to stop suicide bombing as a political decision. And, but again, you're going after the symptoms. Again, at one point I forgot to mention, you talked about freedom and human rights. The Palestinians did not have an example when they lived under Israeli control. When they lived under Israeli control, you can be put in jail for even freedom of speech. Even today, if someone was to, even in the West Bank, if someone was to say or advocate anything, even in terms of speech, Israel will go to the West Bank and arrest these people. Same thing applies to Palestinians in America. If we advocate, even me, who advocates accepting Israel 100%, who advocates the right of Jews to live anywhere they want, even me, if Israel doesn't like my message, they can prevent me from entering the country. So us Palestinians, we certainly didn't have an example where Israel gave us free speech. They didn't. I mean, they gave Jews free speech, They gave Palestinians with Israeli citizenship certainly free speech, but they never gave the people of the West Bank and Gaza free speech. So you're going to have to forgive us in the West Bank and Gaza if we don't have the acceptable standard of accountability yet, which I agree with you, we need it. And I certainly hope every word you say comes true, and I certainly hope the Palestinians reach a point where we have, and I think we will. And I was just looking for a video, and every time I tried to look for it, I had to stop and talk to you. You know, there was a couple of years ago, if you recall, you know, within the Palestinian Authority, one of the Attorney General set up a sting operation, where one of the ministers of the PA was caught on camera trying to have sex with a woman in place of giving her a job, and that person lost his job. So the Palestinians are trying, but you cannot tell them, once you again have paradise, then we can talk about lifting the misery you're in. You know, you really need to come up with a different approach. The only way you can use that argument, you can say, here's the deal we're going to reach. We're going to have a solution like a federated state or a European Union type of situation, but we need to have certain minimum basic human rights, certain basic standards of human rights, of basic respect for humanity, for dignity, and as part of this deal, we expect this for both sides. And are you willing to sign to this or not? If they say no, okay, then we cannot make a deal. If they say yes, we have a deal. You can make the offer that way, but it sounds to me that the way you're making the offer, it doesn't, and I'm sure you don't intend to do it, but it doesn't sound sincere to me. It sounds like this is an excuse not to reach a solution with me. So if you're really sincere, you present it in the fashion I gave it to you.
Calev, do you want to respond to that, please?
I do, and before I point out, there's one point that was raised that I disagree with as far as the assessment of the facts on the ground. But before I get to that, I just want to say that I think we agree with more things than we disagree with in this conversation between Kamal and I. For instance, I agree that we shouldn't annex land without annexing people. I say the opposite. Don't even talk about annexing land. Offer the people citizenship. Talk about land later when you come to discussions on a final solution. I think that when you put the interests of land above the interests of people, what happens when you put land above people? You get a graveyard. And unfortunately, this is the problem, that everybody wants to fight over land while people are suffering with abuses of human rights. So I agree with that. I also agree that we need to give as much freedom as travel as possible, which is subject only to proper security vetting. That's unfortunately because of the facts on the ground. It is true that there were closures that existed before the fence existed, but it's also true that those closures did not exist before the Intifadas. Before the Intifadas, a Palestinian Arab resident of Gaza could drive to Tiberias and have a picnic on the beach of the Sea of Galilee together with his family without going through any closures or borders or checkpoints whatsoever. And so unfortunately, as terrorism grew, also we went from closures to the fence and so on and so forth, and it became more and more closed. And so I think you really have to look at the root of the situation. I agree. I'm not saying that there's no solution. I'm not saying that, first create a utopia of civil and human rights on both sides of the border, and then we can talk. I'm not saying that at all. And I think that we could agree between the Israelis and the Palestinians. I'm not a representative of the Israeli government, and Kamal is not a representative of the Palestinian government. But let's say we're sitting around the table. I think that Kamal is right. I think that you mark your target. You say, okay, are we going for a federation or are we going for two states? If we're going for a federation, this is what we want to see. We want to see protection of human rights, democracy, rule of law, separation of powers, disarmament of radical military militias, and then we can form this situation of joint government that we both agreed to. If we're talking about a two-state solution, even Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu said, I agree to a two-state solution based on these criteria. You have to recognize Israel as a Jewish state, and you have to be demilitarized. And so I'm not saying that that's the ultimate solution, and perhaps Kamal is right. Perhaps some kind of Swiss federation would be better. But you have to set the target, and then set the criteria with which both sides need to fulfill before we can form this type of government. And that's really where we're stuck today, because when you have an entity like the Hamas, which is voted into power in Gaza, that calls for the destruction of the state of Israel and even denies the existence of Israel. I mean, they basically say that Tel Aviv, Haifa, Beersheba, all these Israeli cities are Palestinian towns that are illegally and immorally inhabited by Israelis, and they don't recognize the existence of the state of Israel. It's really hard to even have a place to begin discussions with an entity like that. And so, yes, I think you need to set your goal, and then you need to build the criteria with which you can reach that goal. And I really think that the moral compass for reaching the goal must be human rights. And if we can all agree on that, I believe that we can make progress.
Well, we certainly all agree on human rights without any doubt. And I think you do have partners on the Palestinian side, and I do, not only do I criticize the Israeli government, but I also criticize the Palestinian government too. I think one of the mistakes that the Palestinians have done, the terrible mistake, and that on my next visit, I plan to take a delegation to Abbas to try to address this. One of the biggest mistakes is this idea of anti-normalization, and where Israelis and Palestinians are no longer allowed to interact with each other. And I think that's a terrible, terrible mistake, because people like your guest is unable to interact with his Palestinian partners to work towards the goal of human rights. They should be certain minimum standards without any doubt. And I also think you're right that the Palestinians shouldn't say, I mean, the problem actually doesn't come from the PA. Much of the problem comes from the Palestinians themselves, in that they have said, well, our main concern is to try to figure out our situation from Israel. We'll deal with the PA later. And I think that's a mistake. I think they should hold the PA to high accountability and to expect the highest form of civil rights possible. And you're absolutely right. No one will disagree with you. You certainly will not get a disagreement with me on that issue. But you just have to understand. I don't even. And you mentioned, you say that one of the parties, which is Hamas, talks about the destruction of Israel, and I also say it's not just Hamas who does that. There are other Palestinian groups, even secular, non-religious, who do that. For example, the PFLP, which was primarily a Christian organization for a long time, said that and continues to say that. But even though I still don't put much weight behind that, I don't think you can address this issue or you can judge that under the current circumstances, because these people are saying that in a warlike situation where they feel their misery comes from Israel. Rightly or wrongly, they feel their misery comes from Israel. So even among the PA, I mean, one example is during the second Intifada, where everything was closed, no one was working, no one had money. The overwhelming majority of the Palestinians in the West Bank would have probably called for the destruction of Israel. Once the situation stabilized a little bit, and more than half the population started working again, and the situation improved, the numbers completely changed. I mean, you cannot make decisions based on the short-term rhetoric of what people say, emotional rhetoric, in response to the miserable situation they live in. You cannot do that. Similar, I cannot get angry and make my entire decision based on settlers or Israelis who are angry, who are victims of a bus bombing. I've heard many times of Jews and Israelis who say, we need to kick the Palestinians out and send them to Jordan. Others say we need to kill the Palestinians. And I remind you that Israel doesn't recognize the Palestinians either. I mean, you have a large number, now this new movement within Israel that says, hey, you know what, really, the Palestinians are not really native to this land. Actually, the Palestinians moved here in the 1940s and 30s. So this new thing that I hear over the internet all the time now. So that means the Palestinians, many Israelis don't recognize the Palestinians either. So what we try to do, like at least on our Facebook pages, we tell people, look, if you want to join our group, there's certain basic assumptions you have to assume. And if you do not, you will not be a member. The one is that both Israelis, or let's say both Jews and Palestinians, are native to this land. They have rights to be in this land. They have legitimate, inherent, religious, and ethnic, every kind of right to be in this land. If you don't recognize this, we don't really have a basis. So, just like you want the Palestinians to accept you, you have to accept the Palestinians. Don't think the Palestinians don't hear a large number of Israelis who are talking about kicking them out into Jordan, Israelis who are saying that these people are not native to this land. Palestinians hear this. They hear this all the time, and they repeat this to me at least. They say, look, you see what these people are saying? And if you're a human rights lawyer, how can Israel expect us to have these warm and fuzzy feelings towards them? Forget the general conflict we have. Let's look at something small like Jerusalem. Till this day, a Jew who is born in Jerusalem is considered a citizen of Israel. A Palestinian Christian or Muslim who was born in Jerusalem is not automatically considered a citizen of Israel. In fact, he has to fight just to maintain his residency. If an Israeli in Jerusalem who finds a cheaper house in the West Bank and wants to live there, he can perfectly go and live there. If a resident of Jerusalem finds a cheaper house in Beit Jala, which is a mile away, and wants to go live there, guess what happens? He loses his right to go back to Jerusalem forever. So this cruel, unequal treatment has to stop. You cannot keep doing this to people. You cannot keep putting us under this kind of pressure where you threaten us all the time. You threaten us with being kicked out of our house. The best example is my wife. She was a resident of Gilo. You know where that is. So, when we got married, like most Palestinians, she was still in the process of getting her fighting for her residency permit in Jerusalem. They get, while you're in the court system, which lasts 10 years probably,
right?
They give you this temporary thing. Well, so when we got married and it was time for us to leave, we had hired a lawyer, and that was going nowhere. There was not even a court date. And finally, we needed some kind of travel document. So what did we have to do? We had to go to the Palestinian Authority and get a Palestinian ID. Well, what happens when you get a Palestinian ID? You lose your right to go back to Israel and or Jerusalem. So now, when we go visit, she has to go stay in the West Bank, cannot go to her family's house in Jerusalem. Only I can travel back and forth. So these kind of cruelties have to stop.
Right.
They have to stop if you want if you want us to trust your words.
Right. Calev, do you want to respond?
Yeah, just a few things. I want to correct a point that was made earlier regarding freedom of speech. The clear policy, even of the military administration before the Oslo Accords that was in charge of the West Bank, was that you can say whatever you want, but you cannot act in ways of violence. And so there actually was free speech, and I disagree with it. I think it's a misrepresentation of fact that military police goes into the West Bank and arrests people or has arrested people because of using freedom of speech. The only people that they'll arrest for abuses of freedom of speech are those that incite others to violence. If you're not inciting somebody to violence, you're not going to be arrested for opening your mouth or putting something on a Facebook page or giving an interview or writing an article. That has never happened. Are there abuses of civil and human rights in Israel? Unfortunately, yes. These things need to be taken care of. Again, much of it comes from the security situation. It's interesting that my colleague mentioned Gilo. My parents lived in Gilo several years ago, and they had a situation of a bullet that penetrated their bedroom window in the middle of the night, and thank God nobody was hurt. But there was shooting from Bet Jala into Gilo, and at that time they had to build a wall around the edge of Gilo to protect the citizens, and also clamp down on the checkpoint there. This is unfortunate. These limitations of freedom of movement are unfortunate. Much of it, though, comes back to activities of radicals, which I think we all agree need to be stopped. So, yeah, I mean, I think that it's very clear that there are issues that need to be dealt with in the Israeli society. I want to come back to the issue, though, and that is that I've been investing the last 10 years of my life challenging the Israeli government on issues of civil rights, human rights, freedom of religion, social justice. And it's hard for me to find people on the Palestinian side, counterparts, that are challenging their government on issues of human rights. I understand that there's a fear factor because I understand that there's oppression and not the same freedom of expression and freedom of press that we have on the Israeli side. But you can't blame Israel for everything. There's a point of time where people need to stand up, take responsibility for the actions of their own government, and challenge their government on abuses of human rights. So that's what I'm saying. I think there needs to be a new dialogue, a new critique of the civil rights in the Palestinian Authority in Gaza. I found, unfortunately, I have colleagues that don't expect Arab Palestinians to treat each other like decent human beings. And if for some reason they have a Middle Eastern mentality, they're from a different place, we can't think of them through Western lenses of Western ideals of human rights, democracy, etc. To me, that's a very racist opinion. I believe that Arab Palestinians, Muslims throughout the Middle East, have the same ability that I have to treat their neighbors with respect, dignity, human rights, and values of personal freedoms. And I hope the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian leadership can start moving more in this direction. I believe, and I want to come back to something that former Prime Minister Golda Meir in Israel, she said that when the desire of the Palestinians to destroy Israel is less than the desire to live in freedom with their own state, they will have their own state. So whether that state is an independent Palestinian state, whether it's part of a federation, we'll see how that develops. But first, people need to put down their desire to destroy the other party. Do we have Jews in the Israeli society that deny the existence of Palestinians? Unfortunately, yes. I disagree with them. I think that as long as two people exist that define themselves as Palestinians, the Palestinians exist, because people have the right of self-identification, self-determination. Are there Jews in our society that call out to destroy the Palestinians, that destroy their property, that uproot their olive trees, and so on and so forth? Yes. I think this is heinous. I think it's disgusting. I think it's appalling. I think these people need to be prosecuted according to all of the laws we have in Israel. And I'm gonna fight for a more democratic and free society. And I call out and I reach out to my counterparts on the Palestinian side to get engaged with the same type of work, challenging their government on abuses of human rights.
Look, Caleb, am I pronouncing your name? I don't see how your name is
Calev.
written. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing it right.
Yeah, it's Calev.
Okay, C-A-L-E-V, Calev. Okay.
Yeah.
Calev, look, again, one question you didn't answer. I've been on this show many times, and this is the first time I get into this kind of discussion where it's back and forth. I rather just talk about solution. You know, I broke my own rule today of not talking about back and forth. I really hate doing that because that's what all these things turn into. And I really like talking about specific solutions. Now, and that's why I like to start with a certain basic understanding. Palestinians must accept Jews as native to this land.
I would mute Circuit. Circuit A.
Must accept Jews as native to this land. We must do that. Israelis must accept us as native to this land, and we need to move forward. Now, the one question you're not answering, on several occasions, you use the Israeli Arabs, and you use them as a good example of things that have gone right. But don't you agree the reason they're in that position? I mean, they're not different genetically or in any other way from the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. In fact, the West Bank and Gaza Palestinians are their direct blood relatives. Why do they respond differently to Israel? Do you not think there's a relationship between the civil rights that was given to Israeli Arabs and how they responded to Israel, and the civil rights Israel gave to the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, which it didn't give? I mean, they didn't give them legal status. Don't you think they had something to do with it? You seem to be ignoring this point. And again, the point I was trying to make to you earlier, in terms of Palestinians fighting for human rights, sociologists have written about this for years. People, they make their priorities based on a hierarchy of needs. In the Palestinian Authority, the people's hierarchy of needs they still have to deal with the basics of life. The basics of life is self-preservation. Self-preservation in terms of working and putting food on the table. When you have the basics of life, people generally go to the third step, which is asking full human rights. Don't you think the Palestinians in the West Bank see how Israeli Jews are in Israel, the kind of freedom they have? They see that. They know that. They want that. But they're not in that position now because they're having to deal with preservation issues. So if you understand why Israeli Arabs behave differently, you will understand why those in the West Bank and Gaza behaved very different towards you. One had rights and one did not. Israel chose to give citizenship to the others because at the time they gave them the citizenship, their numbers were very small. They didn't think it would affect the nature of the Jewish state. Now, when Israel took the West Bank, they didn't do that because they thought this could be a demographic nightmare. And this is why I started this discussion by talking numbers, because I think in the mind of average Israeli, it's all about numbers and this demographic dilemma that they think they will have. They don't know what to do about the Palestinian situation because it creates a demographic risk for the state of Israel. We need to address that.
Are you asking me to address the demographic?
No, but I mean, the question to you is, I mean, you keep focusing. All you do is focusing on an issue I agree with you on 100%. I'm ahead of you on that. But the way people work is they put the thing. I mean, at least I can't remember his name. There's a sociologist. I think his name is Maslow or I don't remember his name, but I learned it in college, where people put their priorities based on a hierarchy of needs. And their first hierarchy of needs is self-preservation, meaning you need to put food on the table. When they have the basics, then you deal with issues like human rights. And I want you to address, why do Palestinians inside Israel?
Yeah, and guys, I just muted Circuit, so you might want to...
I did that.
Okay.
Why do the Palestinians inside Israel respond differently to the Jewish state than the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. Do you not think it's because Israel gave one side equality and the other side not, that has something to do with it? And don't you think the solution needs to be found within those parameters?
Yeah, and if we want to go ahead and respond, then why don't we? I don't know how much time each of you have, but if you want to discuss, solutions, please, that'd be great.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm already out of time. I only have a minute. I'm not saying both sides made mistakes in 1967, and then what was the situation before 1967? You had Israel responsible for Israel, Jordan responsible for the West Bank.
Calev, I'm sorry to interrupt.
And then Egypt responsible for Gaza. Now, should after the '67 war we have immediately granted citizenship to Palestinian citizens? Perhaps, and perhaps we would have less problems today if we did back then. But none of us can go back in a time capsule and fix what happened in 1967. I'm more interested in a pragmatic approach of addressing the situation on the ground today, and so I think that's what we need to move forward towards. I'm going to continue challenging my government, the Israeli government, on issues of human rights, and hope that we'll move forward towards a solution. I think we already came to something that could be a very practical step, which is we both agree that it wouldn't be a bad idea to grant citizenship to the Palestinians living in C. Again, without declaring some kind of land annexation. I think we need to take these practical steps of moving things forward, making life easier for people on both sides of the border. I agree with you that people care about existential issues first. So let's create more jobs for Palestinians. Let's invest in economic development of Palestinians. Let's make life easier. Let's grant citizenship to the Arabs living in Area C, so we can make progress towards a healthy dialogue and really sit down and advance towards solutions.
Well, I tell you what, if out of this discussion we get citizenship for those who live in C, then I'd be one happy person, and we would have accomplished, and I'd forget about the rest at least until tomorrow.
So listen, when as Vonvo continues to grow, it's we're gonna have more people following these discussions, and I just wanted to thank each of you for your time. If Calev, you have to go, thank you so much for your time, and hopefully people who are watching, which we had a nice audience here, got a hold of each of your perspectives, and we're happy to have Kamal. You've been on multiple times. Calev, we're happy to have you back on again. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and it was a pleasure meeting you, Kamal, and hopefully we can have further discussions in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, hopefully I'll be there in December. Hopefully we can meet and see if we can just get to know each other better.
Yalla, that would be great.
Okay, bye.
See you. Bye-bye.